Europe, there's a heightened level of desperation and need. Besides the humanitarian crisis, governments are grappling with security concerns from unchecked immigrants crossing the porous borders. Friday, one United Nations official said it's just the tip of the iceberg. Full Measure correspondent Scott Thuman traveled to one of the most squalid camps on the European continent.
It is known by one name, the Jungle, a refugee camp on the outskirts of Calais, France, the last stop before getting to England and the last hope for thousands. It is sadly one of many, from the masses in Hungary to those in Germany, Austria to Lebanon, each border hosting its own crisis, a crush of people that can't be controlled and yet won't be stopped. Back in Calais, they risk their lives in nightly attempts to leave. Here we witness a group make the 2-hour trek, hoping to sneak aboard a train headed for Great Britain. Every morning, a slightly smaller group returns. A few, it seems, have made it across.
You said you know people who've done that, who've gotten away?
Yeah, some of our friends, yeah, they have.
Yeah. All the way to the UK?
Yeah, Scotland, London, Manchester, United, Liverpool, all of them, they are there.
More often than not, it seems they are caught, despite what would almost literally seem a needle in a haystack challenge for police, who on this day we watch find 2 women stowed away in a semi-truck.
How long were you in the truck?
10 hours.
Across the region, nations' walls go up. The added fencing, barbed wire, and constant police presence are needed because many say there's just no way of knowing who is among these camps, a sort of quality control.
You don't want anyone to come through who is coming into this country because they are part of a terror gang, and we cannot be blind to the fact that threat exists. We know there are people who are working with ISIL in the Middle East, who want to plan and are actively seeking to plan, terror attacks on the UK and other Western countries.
And there is another factor here.
Refugees tell me that they escape the so-called jungle successfully every single day, whether it's by getting through the barbed wire and onto trucks or ferries, or something even more extreme.
Traffickers. Nathan Johnston is a volunteer medic here.
And you hear much about the smugglers?
Not really, they're very guarded because obviously the smugglers have a lot to lose and they're quite powerful people.
That is an international criminal group of people that has to be cracked down on as well, and that is another very important part of our response.
Because they're not just going to bring across a refugee who has money, they will also bring across people who would come here perhaps to do harm.
Well, I think they're people without scruple.
A daunting effect that halts the asylum process for refugees like Ali Ibrahim. Ali claims he was a sniper in the Syrian army, but rather than keep killing, he quit. So he was tortured by Assad's men, he says, and made sure he couldn't shoot again for either side.
See the bone?
So they beat him with a hammer?
Something like that, yes. That's him what you said, yes, with a hammer.
The stories are countless.
I'm being honest, everyone's sacrifice. Everyone's same. But you have children as well. You have women pregnant. And same, you have people diabetic. Like people is cooking in dirty water, plenty of bacteria, no hygiene.
Few say there is hard evidence that terrorists are getting past police and onto British-bound trains or stowing away in semis, but there's truly no way of knowing who is. One ISIL claim, 4,000 jihadists have snuck through. A Lebanese government official suggests 1 in 50 are operatives.
There's a lot of people coming every day. I don't know where I come from. You don't know me who I am. That's the problem.
It's not really black and white on that. One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. So, I can't really comment on that. And, I've treated lots of different people here and with lots of different political views.
As varied as they might be, they do have one common thread: desperation and the yearning to do whatever it takes to find a new home. Not willing to accept that the many nations now deciding their fate are at a crossroads, and the wait an unbearable one.
In 2014, an estimated 12,000 people traveled to Syria to fight for ISIS, for a total estimated at 27,000 to 31,000 fresh recruits from all over the globe. That means tens of thousands of sons and daughters go missing and may never return, except in the case of one father from Belgium, Dimitri Bonting. When his teenage son joined a terror group and then disappeared in Syria, Dimitri began a dangerous and incredible journey to bring him home. Full Measure correspondent Scott Thuman has his story of the Great Escape.
If you didn't go to Syria to get your son, would he be alive today?
No.
he would have paid the ultimate highest price to die as a martyr. Yeah.
What Dimitri Bonting faced was an almost impossible and certainly frightening challenge for any father: to save his son from a terror training camp inside of Syria. Even the lead up to this moment was baffling. Yeyoun was hardly the ideal foreign fighter. Born in Belgium and raised Catholic, he seemed the average teen, even visited Washington, D.C. and spoke admiringly of the American dream. But after a breakup with a girl and meeting another who introduced him to the Quran, Yeyoun began to change, and soon after, under the lie that he was going with friends to Amsterdam, he instead went to Syria to join Islamic extremists.
We were in shock. Of course, what do you think? We are not Muslims.
Determined to bring him back, Dimitri, a former soldier, began plotting his son's rescue.
How I'm going to do it? I don't speak Arabic, I don't have experience in the Middle East, I don't have any connections in the Middle East.
The first trip with a journalist turned up nothing. On his second, a solo attempt, Dimitri says he found the group holding his son, led by longtime terror suspect Abu Asir.
What did they do to you?
They took all my clothes out, beating me, they put a cap above my head, handcuffed me, and take me upstairs in a place where they interpolate me all the time and beating. Because they really suspect me to be a spy.
They're beating you, they're torturing you.
They're torturing me.
They're questioning you.
Yes.
And the whole time you're saying, I'm just trying to find my son.
I'm a father who is looking for his son. They didn't care if I was the father or not. Because they say it's Allah decided that he's here. And Allah go above everything. It was really, really very hard negotiation.
After forming a seemingly odd but necessary relationship with the group, Dimitri and his son were reunited and allowed to leave.
The day that you got him out of Syria and across the border, and you're in safety, what is the feeling?
The first moment when I know we are safe, 100%, I hold him like a small baby, like a child, you know. We were both crying, you know. We were both crying. It was an emotional moment. Yeah.
While that story alone seems like a script written for Hollywood, the sequel may be even bigger.
I thought I have my son back, and this is over, this nightmare. We're going to start a new life, but my life just started after that.
Started because Dimitri's success meant hope for other parents of radicalized teenagers turned jihadis. Through his website and word of mouth, he was soon flooded with requests.
The only something I could wish is that all these Western youngsters return home where they belong, you know.
But it's not just a wish, you actually go. You go back to Syria.
Yes.
You go to Iraq.
Yes. Yes.
How many times?
Totally 26 times.
And how successful are you at getting children back?
I get 5 back. 5 back. Live, physical, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 back. Yeah.
There have been failures, he says. For example, an unnamed American family in which the son refused to return. And reasoning with the terror groups an often upside-down world of backwards logic. Then there's what Dimitri calls government interference.
Especially in U.S. cases, is advising the parents not to go there. That's the advice they give.
While Dimitri boasts of himself as a modern-day Mother Teresa, he is no longer working for free. The dangers, he says, are too great.
You risk your life every time?
I risk my life every time. And believe me, ISIS know who I am, and they know when they see me with other parents by the border. They know for what I'm there, what I'm coming to do. They know I'm trying to take kids out.
But his calling is too loud. As he puts it, he wakes up Syria, he goes to bed Syria, and couldn't stop, even if he wanted to. Dimitri says his son was also held with James Foley, the American journalist who was killed, and John Cantley, the British photographer who is still among the terror groups. Cheryl?
And so what happened to his son after he got back?
Yeah, so Yeyoun was released after about 40 days in a Belgian jail for his affiliation with the terror group. He regrets his decision. He says he is no longer religious. And Dimitri says that when he gets to that point, his son will be an advocate to try and deter other young people from being radicalized. He calls him the perfect witness.
Scott Thuman, thanks. Very interesting.
The images of despair, the frenzy, immigrants fleeing war and anxious to call Europe their new home, have been seen around the world. What many may not have seen is the invisible side effect of it all. a potential that has put all of Europe in crisis mode.
We have to tell the world that this is over, we will close our borders, and we won't let anybody in now for a while.
People who disagree with you, who are on the complete opposite side, think that your way of thinking is inhuman, it's insensitive, it's unfair.
It is, of course, very hard sometimes to speak out the truth, but the truth is that we can't solve the problems of the world, and we can't solve the problems of all the poor people in the world.
The seemingly harsh tone taken by Beatrix von Stoy, deputy of Germany's right-wing Alternative for Deutschland party, has become part of a booming chorus. Rallies have become violent, even sparked more public revitalization of neo-Nazi groups who see their continent changing, edging toward a possibly historic chasm. Is this one of the biggest crises Germany has seen since World War II?
I think this is the biggest crisis Europe has seen ever since the last war, yes.
And perhaps no city in Europe is a better example than Berlin, where in another time a tide of refugees fleeing from east to west created a dividing line that lasted for decades.
This is one of the last remnants of the Berlin Wall. Ever since the Iron Curtain fell 26 years ago, Europeans have proudly enjoyed the freedom to go from country to country. But now, in light of new worries over terrorism and immigration, new types of barriers are going up. From Hungary to Croatia to Slovenia, workers erect wire fencing, and passport checks have been reinstituted at borders in France, Germany, and Austria.
We still want to help, but the numbers are too high now. Several thousand people coming to Germany every day in a quite unregulated manner, people crossing European borders with no right to cross them. So we have to restore law and order in this process.
Gunter Krings is a state secretary for the interior in Germany and says the offer to take in up to 1 million refugees in 2015 meant taking the lid off a jar they can no longer close, not without what some would consider drastic measures.
The Schengen Agreement is in danger. We have to be quite frank about it.
The Schengen Agreement, created back in 1985, began the process of dissolving borders between more than 24 European countries. That allowed for free travel and, more importantly, free trade. The prospects of now limiting either could bring disaster to the European Union, already facing economic stress by raising the cost for business, deterring tourists, and making it harder for people to live in one EU country and work in another.
The European Commission, quite frankly, looked the other way for years.
That dilemma between a need for security, saving free trade, and refugees has put Germany's once popular Chancellor Angela Merkel in peril on her home turf. In the U.S. and France, the press named her Person of the Year. But the woman the refugees call Mama Merkel is not winning hearts at home. Extreme and neo-Nazi groups kept in the shadows for decades are re-emerging, loudly demanding her resignation. Journalist and author Olaf Sundermeyer has been studying the rise of radical groups.
We have a strong right-wing movement in Germany for years, but it always has been under control by the police, by civil society, by political parties, by us, the media. But now you have a merge, people come together. You have this really hardcore neo-Nazis, people that are violent, that are willing to burn refugees' homes or attack migrants or homosexuals on the street. And then you have on the other side people from the middle of the society that have their concerns towards the United States, towards refugees, towards all these things. And these people now get together, which was absolutely not possible since World War II in Germany.
An irony no more evident than here at the old Stasi headquarters. The signs from East Germany's most feared spy agency still on the walls, but behind the doors, Syrian refugees. A staggering 900 immigrants from the Middle East and Africa filled the old spy office, now run by the Red Cross, in just 3 days.
We have no name, we have no paper, we cannot go to doctor, we cannot go to anywhere, we are just number.
Bassem Hartani's family, sharing a pair of bunk beds, is from Aleppo. They say even if borders were closed, they'd still have made their way to Europe with little intention of ever returning to Syria. What is your future?
I don't know.
You don't know where you'll live?
Really, I don't know.
How you'll survive? How you'll work?
I don't know yet.
The cataclysmic fears? The demand on social services too much. The economic strain on Europe could cripple it. and cities would lose an identity they fought so hard to retain.
In this regard, it was an accident waiting to happen, and it happened.
And much of the anger directed not at the Middle East, but at America.
What should America be doing differently?
Well, I think they just accepted to take 10,000. This is what we take every day, so maybe they take a bit more than 10,000.
They blame the US policy for refugees coming here, and these people don't want the refugees, and they don't want US foreign policy.
It is one of the last places you might imagine rooting for, a country steeped in a violent history, often at odds with America, where flags of terror groups line streets and banners of assassinated leaders drape buildings. But stability in Lebanon may be exactly what helps to keep America safe too, especially after this. Suicide bombers hit Beirut, killing dozens, wounding hundreds. Retaliation against the Lebanese group Hezbollah, which has been fighting ISIS in Syria. A day later, ISIS unleashes an even larger attack on Paris. Panic is widespread.
And I'm still feel shocked, even if I really feel shocked, because it could have been my family or my friends who were there, or me.
While it's easy for Americans to relate to what happens in France, those at the first bombing site say Americans should care just as much about what happens in Beirut.
I think what we're witnessing now is a dysfunctional state.
What could that mean in the fight against terror?
All terrorist organizations that would find a safe haven in some places in Lebanon and act with impunity and try to recruit more youngsters, brainwash them, push them to commit more suicidal attacks.
Lebanese political analyst and activist Eli Fawaz says if this sounds familiar, it should. The so-called Arab Spring that began 5 years ago, bolstering optimism from Tunisia to Egypt, Libya to Yemen and beyond, was a rallying cry denouncing leaders like Gaddafi and Morsi. But without structure or constitutions to build on, they collapsed. The voids were filled with terror groups seeking a worldwide caliphate. Some fear Lebanon is next.
The U.S. has a major role in stabilizing the country, but it's not doing so because the actual administration is basically moving away from the region. Now Syria is a vacuum. Now Yemen is a vacuum. Now Libya is a vacuum. Iraq is a vacuum. We have 4 countries that cease to exist in the Middle East.
Even in a place like Beirut, where they've learned to live with war for a very long time, what's happening right now is a new and worrisome challenge. If the United States doesn't intervene, if the United States doesn't beat ISIL, will Lebanon be overtaken?
Of course. You understand what I mean. When I say United States stop war, you know what I mean. All Arab countries, all the world, United States, she can't stop war.
It's not exactly a linchpin holding the region together, but Lebanon and its clear path between Syria and the Mediterranean Sea is a strategic partner. The U.S. has sold hundreds of millions of dollars in warplanes and missiles to the Lebanese. Bassem Shab is a member of parliament.
Most of our equipment is American. Our training is American. And we are dependent on American aid to sustain most of the equipment.
And just as Lebanon relies on the U.S., Beirut has something to offer too.
What we can help with is human intelligence, because the Lebanese army and the internal security forces have people who are detained. There was a possible suicide bomber who was detained in Tripoli.
It is not the first time America has invested weapons and personnel in the country. This, what looks like an industrial park today, 32 years ago was the site of the deadliest attack against U.S. Marines since Iwo Jima, when Hezbollah militants set off a truck bomb at the Marine barracks, killing 241 Americans.
They had lost 6 Marines to snipers and bombs. So amidst the mourning tonight are many, many questions. So far, we know the 129 people killed came from 19 different nations. At least one was an American. We still don't know the identities of everyone killed. We also don't know yet what role terrorists disguised as refugees fleeing Syria's civil war may have played. So it's that last point that is causing concern around the globe, especially in France. ABC 7's senior political reporter Scott Thuman is there in Paris tonight. And Scott, you also visited one of those refugee camps near Calais, France, earlier this year. What can you tell us about all of this tonight?
Yeah, it's an interesting consideration at this point, Allison. We were in what's called the jungle. It is one of the toughest refugee camps right now regarding the Syrian crisis, and it is in Calais, France. That's strategically located, the last stop before you would make it to England, so it's always been under the microscope quite a bit. But there was a raid conducted there. We don't know the results of that raid, only that it goes to that further point that so many here and all across the area are very genuinely concerned that something else terrible is going to happen.
For at least one moment, all of Paris seemed to stop. Silence, remembrance, and then questions. How can they keep from being struck again on that vast differences?
Do we need to be more aggressive? The fact they attacked Syria, I don't think it was a good idea. And I'm afraid. I'm really, really, really scared.
While French and U.S. fighter jets immediately unleashed a torrent of attacks in Syria, the real power was concentrated in a room in Turkey, world leaders under pressure for policies that the Islamic State are defeating.
Is it time for your strategy to change?
There will be an intensification of the strategy that we put forward. The strategy that we are putting forward is the strategy that ultimately is going to work. It's going to take time.
And new criticism in light of word at least one attacker may have been among a group of refugees.
Regardless of what the investigation here in Paris unveils, the debate over how and even whether to accept refugees will only intensify.
They should have been vetted when they were coming in, you see, and they weren't vetted. He won't be the first and he probably won't be the last.
In the U.S., the president's plan to accept possibly 10,000 more Syrians in the next year, a highly polarizing decision.
What I see are sort of these knee-jerk reactions to immigration.
I think we need maybe more control. Yeah, we don't feel safe.
Yeah, not feeling safe, that's a sentiment we heard quite a bit of today. And another example of that is that here downtown, we were staying in a hotel not far from the Champs-Élysées here. It's not that big of a hotel. They told us around noon they already had 38 room cancellations, people not wanting to come to Paris. Some of the major sites shut down as well. So this is something that's going to linger for quite some time. And last point here, President Hollande here in France asking for a 3-month state of emergency. So a lot still to figure out here in this crisis. Allison?